Right now, I would say that the conversation in the public sphere about polyamory is very sexually focused. Like, it's all about the sexual interaction among multiple people, kind of that it must be a constant orgy or something. If you're having a polyamorous relationship, it's just a daily orgy. And turns out that's not the case, actually, that polyamory is much more focused on the emotional complexities and the emotional connection among multiple people. And while the sex is fun and interesting and a big draw for some people, it's definitely not the main event in most polyamorous relationships. In fact, if what you want is just access to lots of new sexual partners, then swinging is a much better route to go than polyamory, because polyamory takes so much discussion and negotiation around emotional boundaries and feelings that people in polyamorous relationships tend to really have much more time spent talking and interacting and hanging out. You know, they're much more likely to be folding laundry and binging on Netflix than having an orgy, is the actual truth. And that's one of the things I loved about the play, Monopoly, is I felt like it gave a peek into the sexuality and that being a draw for people, and that was very accurate, but that the vast majority of the play was focused on the interactions and the emotional tone that takes, and how it makes the people involved really think about things in a different way and think deeply about who they are and what they want out of life and relationships. And so I found that just not only quite accurate, but really entertaining the way they did it, the discussion of it, the witty banter on stage, I found just incredibly entertaining, really laugh out loud funny. I enjoyed it a lot.
When I first started being open about being poly, it was very challenging for me to have conversations about that. And I was always stumbling over myself of like, well, it's kind of like this, kind of like, it's really great because now I've written dialogue that I know very well. So when people start asking me questions about poly, I just quote the character that I wrote. My personal pet theory on open relationships or polyamory or whatever you want to call it is primarily a mechanism by which you can honestly speak to what's happening for you and negotiate with someone else of what's happening for them and find out what your common ground is, if there is any. That is the definition that works for me in my relationships.
I was talking to someone recently about the show and non-monogamy, and I said ethical non-monogamy, and they kind of laughed. They were like, oh, well, how is that ethical? And I was like, okay, I'm going to have to explain this, but now if you see the play, it explains it for you. When you get married to someone, you're making a vow. Well, if that vow is we're going to be monogamous, and you go outside your relationship and you sleep with someone, then obviously that's not ethical. But if your vow has nothing to do with that part of it, it has to do with loving and caring and being there for each other and all of those, which are really kind of like the most important parts of that vow, you know what I mean? And within that vow, you're like, well, we're going to also have the ability to go and have other kinds of relationships, sexual and otherwise, outside of this relationship, and you're both agreeing to that, then as long as you're like doing that is not a problem and it's ethical. But then the other piece of it is not just, well, we're okay with having a sexual relationship outside of our relationship, but it's making sure that the person that you're having that relationship with, if they're in a relationship, their partner is also okay with it, because it's not okay to be the person who's breaking up a marriage. That's not ethical either. So there's like two sides of it.
For some people, polyamory is a sexual orientation or a relational orientation. It's something deeply embedded in the core of their being. Lots of women in polyamorous relationships experience personal power, experience polyamory as empowering, which was not what I expected when I first started thinking about or learning about polyamory. I guess that I shared the misconception with other people that it was a male-driven thing, that it was men wanting to have multiple partners, probably because the way I got into it, it was exactly that way for my now ex-husband. He really wanted multiple partners for him and not for me. Polyamory doesn't work that well that way. He and I are divorced now exactly for that reason, and I've seen that over and over in terms of men wanting to have multiple partners and then feeling uncomfortable about the women they're with having multiple partners. And I think the play, the monopoly play, dealt with that issue fantastically. Very accurate description of how it can be a double-edged sword